Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. My dear beloved sisters, brothers, teachers, colleagues. So today, I started by talking about Khadija radiallahu anha. And in this second session, they actually gave me a figure I was not expecting, but I am so delighted that we are covering this today. Clara Muhammad. Clara Muhammad, all too often people relegate her role in the Nation of Islam as simply the wife of Elijah Muhammad, but rarely do people know or acknowledge the role that Clara played in creating and sustaining the first independent private schools for Black Muslim children in 1930-1931 with the founding of the University of Islam, as well as in starting groups like the Muslim Girls in Training, otherwise known as MGT, while she carried on the vision for the organization from 1935 to 1946 while Elijah Muhammad was incarcerated. The University of Islam started in her home with her children. What does that say? What reminder does that give us? When homeschooling was actually illegal. Their idea was that only a universal education rooted in freedom, justice, and equality could reverse the problems and challenges in the American public educational school system. Problems we still see and feel in our communities today. Children must be taught with an enthusiasm exceeding that in public schools, Clara Muhammad said. Don't remain dependent as a people or a community on those that reject and want to use you. This is considered one of the earliest examples of religious home tutelage, and for many of us today who have benefited from full-time Islamic schools in America, this is the origin, and Clara Muhammad is the mother of Islamic schools in America. Their mission and vision for the Clara Muhammad schools, which was previously named the University of Islam before her son, W.D. Muhammad, actually ushered the Nation of Islam into Sunni orthodoxy, mainstream orthodoxy. And then he renamed the schools after his mother. That's why we have the Clara Muhammad schools. He wanted to honor her legacy and her sacrifices for how she helped to work and establish both the nation and how it developed a lot of the social services that they ran and the educational system. And the mission of Clara Muhammad is to provide children with a wholesome, safe environment, to encourage the development of God consciousness, academic excellence, and good moral character, and to establish a strong teacher-parent-child relationship. As a private institution, CMS, the Clara Muhammad schools, not only promotes prayer in school, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is kept at the forefront of education instead of secularizing it. So if we look back, we see a lot of what we find in Clara Muhammad's example and what she focused on really goes back to the methodologies of the seerah and actually addresses many of the challenges we are facing in the broader American Muslim landscape today. You don't have to agree with her full trajectory in the Nation of Islam and then later, but we can look at what she did, honor that legacy, and say, yes, we need to actually continue this and we need to replicate this or we need to optimize this. She knew poverty and suffering. Clara Muhammad was from the Jim Crow South. There was segregation. She experienced the Ku Klux Klan. Like, these were real issues, and they were in extreme poverty. Her husband could not maintain a job. He was going through alcoholism, and it was actually Clara Muhammad who introduced Elijah Muhammad to the minister in the Nation of Islam, which actually ushered in the whole organization and his leadership. Without Clara Muhammad making that connection, it would have been very different in history. She actually started to raise 8 children alone because, again, From 1935 to 1946, she was a single mother. She was the leader of the NOI, the organizing leader, and she started this school system. She was still carrying on what she believed. Once she converted to Islam, that was it. She was a woman of Tawheed. She knew that her people were being oppressed, much like the Muslim minority we find today and the segments within that community of which we all are a part. And she knew the educational system. If we go back, how many times does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala highlight the importance of knowledge? Why are we here today examining the lives of all of these legends? Because we consistently learn from the history of our nations, from the prophets, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and peace be upon them. She rose up to meet the needs of her people and community regardless of the challenges. She actually did it because of the challenges. There were police raids on the schools. Children and teachers were taken into custody because they were charged with the delinquency of minors for homeschooling them. They had around 400 children in the school at that time. 400. A headquarters and a school set up in Hastings Street was raided by police and Detroit school officials on April 16, 1934. Several members were arrested and held. They were charged with contributing to the delinquency of minors and teaching subversive doctrines. Doctrines that will corrupt the minds of these children. The next day, 500 Nation of Islam members marched to the police headquarters to see those who were arrested, and they were met by the Detroit police, and this eventually led to the release. In 1962, legislators tried to shut down the Chicago schools that were a runoff of the Clara Muhammad schools, but were unsuccessful. There are double standards, and it's no different than any other religious or parochial schools that already existed. There were Catholic and Protestant schools, but guess what? They were also targeted when they first came up because there was a conflict between, hey, the Protestants are teaching subversive doctrines. Now you just fast forward, a few decades later, and we're using the same argument against Muslim schools now. And what do we see today? We see the same marginalization, the same alienation. No wonder we feel internalized stigmatization, our confusion about our identities. When we look at the model of the Nation of Islam, again, you don't have to agree with the theology or the aqidah that was leading up to the transition to Orthodoxy Islam, but we have to honor and appreciate where they did it well. They understood because they were from the community. They had known poverty. They understood the need for unifying the community and meeting the needs of the community. Social services, and this goes back to the example and the methodologies of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in community organizing and the seerah, and what we see in a lot of post-hijrah seerah. The training of trainers was essential. In fact, they utilized older students to teach the younger ones. This is intergenerational mentorship that we so desperately need in today's masajid, in today's centers, in today's organizations. There was a focus on moral uplift, meaning what do you need to be a God-conscious person? What do you need to practice to instill that in you? What do you need to see modeled around you so that you grow up knowing this is the way? Strong tarbiyah, self-development, cultivation of character, and self-sufficiency in communities, which I must say the Somali community does really well. Yes. Please give yourselves a hand. You take care of each other. You understand that you need to put money back into your own community instead of giving it to the capitalist system in which we live that is only working to oppress you. This is an integrative approach. There wasn't dissonance with one another. When you look at the trajectory of Islamic schools in America, this very first period was one that was really important because these subsequent periods came through immigrant waves saying okay, we don't want these Western ideas to impact our children. So it was on the defensive. But the Clara Muhammad schools weren't. They were on the offensive. They said, we are going to claim our children. We are going to bring them up. We are going to teach them who they are so they are proud of who they are. And what do we need more than ever now today? The majority of American Muslim youth and young adults do not feel welcome in the masajid, in our organizations, in our communities. Over 60% of the American Muslim community is between the ages of 18 and 35, and the majority of whom only make up 1/4 of mosque participation. That means for every 4 of you sitting in a row, only 1 of you is participated in your local mosque if you are between the ages of 18 and 35. We also have a huge issue when it comes to being welcoming. Only 19% of mosques score excellent in being women-friendly, 29% score high on community involvement, and 25% score high in political movement. And guess what? These were the 3 areas that the Nation of Islam, through the Clara Muhammad schools, really focused on. They focused on empowering women and children. They focused on intergenerational mentorship. They focused on authentic relational community, not transactional, where I just say salam alaikum and I want you to come to the event so I can check off a box. We have to rethink how we are running our institutions, how we are participating in our communities. Are we actually showing up for one another? Are we actually proud to be Muslims in America? Are you proud to be Muslim in America? I can't hear you. Then let's show them that. In a Gallup 2017 poll, it mentions that what brings the majority of people to faith-based communities is welcoming practices, community outreach, and pathways to develop oneself holistically. This describes everything that we learn from the example and the methodologies of the Prophet ﷺ in his community organizing efforts, the training of trainers. If you actually look at how relational, it took 2 years of relationship building before Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was invited to Yathrib, then renamed Medina when he became the first centralized authority. 2 years, and that was not in the time of WhatsApp. That was a lot of work. So make sure you are being patient and you are trusting in the way of Allah. And know that even if you just start with one thing, you start addressing the issue that you see in your community, it can create waves for generations to come. I want you to know that as of today, we have around 235, 250 Islamic schools. We have an accreditation process that has been established. We have the Council of Islamic Schools in North America, first founded in 1989 with an educational symposium, then an ad hoc committee, and then formally culminating in the first full-time Islamic School General Assembly in 1991. In 2008, they began efforts with Advanced Ed to provide accreditation, and in 2011, the Council of Islamic Schools in North America started providing accreditations themselves. So you see how with just one person answering the call of Allah, staying on that path, and answering the needs in their community, that's how she became a legend. That's how she started what we all have benefited probably from today in one way or another. And we should not use our cancel culture mentality of today to just say, oh, Clara Muhammad, NOI, No, we have to recognize where something was done well, and these are lessons that are crucial, that are critical to the sustainability of the American Muslim community at large and faith-based communities. By just next year, 2023, the largest faith-based, in air quotes, the largest faith-based affiliation is the unaffiliated. Unaffiliated with faith, unaffiliated with institutions, unaffiliated with formal organizations. And guess what? You know where our people are going? Secular, political, social, human rights movements and organizations. This is a part of our tradition. This is exactly what Islam teaches us to do in community organizing, in creating a community of people. And I want to just end with this. In Sahih Bukhari, narrated by Abu Musa, the Prophet ﷺ said, "A faithful believer to a faithful believer is like the bricks of a wall enforcing each other." And while saying that, the Prophet ﷺ clasped his hands by interlacing his fingers. And I remind you that in Al-Imran, chapter 3, verse 103, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Holy Quran, "And hold firmly to the rope of Allah and do not be divided. Remember Allah's favors upon you when you were enemies. Then He united your hearts. So you, by His grace, became brothers. And you were at the brink of a fiery pit, and He saved you from it." This is how Allah makes His revelations clear to you so that you may be rightly guided. So I remind you, my brothers and sisters, my dear, dear Muslim family, to hold firmly onto the rope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not only individually, but more importantly, together. This critical mass requires brotherhood and sisterhood, intergenerational relationships, and mentorship that ultimately fortify the Muslim community and helps mobilize them to enact systemic solutions and societal change. Like I said before, you are all agents of change. We have legends in the making sitting in this room, and none of your good deeds, however small, are seemingly insignificant, is insignificant in the eyes of your Lord. Please remember this as you go forward, and may we continue these legacies of the legends that we are learning today. Jazakumullah khairan.